When my late father-in-law's sister looked me in the eye and said, "Your boy doesn't belong at our family reunion," I felt my world tilt. But what happened when my son showed up anyway, what he carried in his hands that day, changed everything, forever. That moment revealed secrets that had been buried for decades, and watching the color drain from their faces when they realized what he held, well, let's just say some truths have a way of surfacing at exactly the right time. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Elena Moreau, and I've spent the last 8 years trying to find my place in the Davidson family tree. It's a tree with deep roots, old money, and branches that seem to grow away from anyone they deem unworthy. When I married James Davidson, I thought I was marrying into warmth and tradition. What I got instead was a family that treated me like a visiting acquaintance, and my son Lucas like an unfortunate side effect of their precious bloodline. Lucas is 14 now, but he was 6 when James and I got married. His biological father had vanished before his first birthday, leaving me to navigate single motherhood while working double shifts at the hospital where I'm a nurse. James didn't just accept Lucas, he embraced him, adopted him legally, gave him the Davidson name. But James's family, they never quite got the memo about acceptance. The Davidson family reunion happens every summer at the old estate in Martha's Vineyard. It's been a tradition for over 60 years, started by James's grandfather, Theodore Davidson, back when the family fortune was still growing. Theodore was different from the rest of them, warmer, more inclusive. He died when Lucas was 9, but in those 3 years, he was the only family member who truly saw my son as belonging. I remember the first reunion we attended as a married couple. Lucas was 7, shy but eager to please. He wore the little sailor outfit I'd bought specially for the occasion, his dark hair combed perfectly. The other Davidson children were polite, but distant. The adults smiled at me with that practiced politeness that never quite reaches the eyes. James's mother, Margaret, had passed away before I met him, but his aunts and uncles more than made up for her absence with their collective judgment. Patricia, James's father's sister, was the unofficial family matriarch after Theodore's death. She ran those reunions like military operations, complete with assigned seating, scheduled activities, and unspoken rules about who belonged where. Over the years, I watched Lucas try to fit in. He learned the family stories, memorized the genealogy, even took sailing lessons because that's what Davidson children do. But there was always something, a forgotten birthday invitation here, a family photo there where he somehow got cropped out, conversations that stopped when he entered the room. James tried. God, he tried. He'd pull Patricia aside, have quiet conversations with his cousins, make subtle corrections when someone referred to Lucas as Elena's boy instead of his son. But James was conflict-averse by nature, raised to keep peace at all costs. He fought battles but never declared war. The breaking point came this past spring. I was in the kitchen making lunch when James came home from work, his face pale and drawn. He sat at our kitchen table, the same table where Lucas did his homework every night, where we played board games on Sunday afternoons, and couldn't meet my eyes. "There's an issue with this year's reunion," he started, his voice carefully neutral in a way that immediately set my nerves on edge. "What kind of issue?" I asked, though something in my stomach already knew. Patricia called. She said. He paused, ran his hands through his hair. She said the accommodations are tight this year, that maybe it would be best if just I attended. The words hung between us like smoke from a fire that was about to spread everywhere. I set down the sandwich I was making, my hands suddenly unsteady. "Just you," I repeated. She didn't say it directly, but, Elena, she meant Lucas specifically. Something about keeping the reunion for direct descendants this year. I felt heat rise from my chest to my face. "Direct descendants? Lucas is your son. You adopted him. His last name is Davidson. I know that. I told her that. James finally looked at me, and I could see the war happening behind his eyes. She said paperwork doesn't change DNA. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while James slept fitfully beside me. How do you tell a 14-year-old boy that his father's family doesn't want him at their reunion? How do you explain that love and legal documents apparently aren't enough to earn him a seat at their table? I decided not to tell Lucas immediately. I hoped James would fight harder, would find a way to change their minds. But as the weeks passed and the reunion drew closer, it became clear that the decision was final. James would go alone, make excuses about why we couldn't make it, and life would continue as it always had, with us on the outside looking in. The conversation with Lucas happened on a Thursday evening in June. He was in his room, working on a summer reading assignment when I knocked on his door. He looked up from his book and my heart clenched at how much he looked like James when he concentrated. The same furrow between his brows, the same way of chewing his bottom lip. "Can we talk, honey?" He saved his place and gave me his full attention. That was Lucas, always polite, always considerate, even when he could sense difficult news coming. "About the reunion," I started, and watched his face change. "We're not going, are we?" It wasn't really a question. I sat on the edge of his bed, choosing my words carefully. Dad is going to go. But there was some confusion about accommodations, and it seems like there won't be room for both of us this year. Lucas nodded slowly. He was too smart to believe the accommodation story, but too kind to call me out on the gentle lie. "It's because I'm not really a Davidson, isn't it?" he asked quietly. My heart broke in that moment. Not cracked or bruised, broke completely, irreparably. "You are a Davidson, Lucas. You are every bit as much James's son as if you'd been born to us both." He smiled sadly, but not to them. I couldn't lie to his face. No, not to some of them. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Then he looked up at me with eyes that seemed too old for his 14 years. "Mom, can I ask you something? About Grandpa Theodore?" The question caught me off guard. "Of course." Before he died, he used to tell me stories about the family, about how his grandfather came to America with nothing, how the Davidsons built everything from scratch. He said the best families aren't the ones who keep people out. They're the ones who bring people in. I remembered those conversations between Lucas and Theodore. The old man had taken to my son immediately, spending hours with him in his study, teaching him chess, sharing family history. Theodore had been different from the rest of them. Warmer, more interested in character, then bloodline. He also told me something else, Lucas continued. He said he was working on something that would make sure the family stayed true to its values, that he was writing down his wishes for how the Davidsons should treat people. At the time, I'd assumed Theodore was talking about updating his will or writing some kind of family mission statement. The man was in his 80s after all, and thinking about legacy was natural. "Do you think he would have wanted me at the reunion?" Lucas asked. "I know he would have," I said without hesitation. Lucas nodded, something shifting in his expression. "Then maybe I should be there." The week before the reunion was tense in our house. James left on Friday morning, clearly conflicted about going without us. He kissed me goodbye at the door, hugged Lucas for longer than usual. "I'll make this right," he promised. "Next year will be different." But Lucas and I both knew that next year would be more of the same unless something fundamental changed. Saturday morning, I was surprised when Lucas came downstairs dressed nicely, khakis, button-down shirt, the kind of outfit he'd wear to the reunion. "Where are you going, honey?" "To see Mrs. Peterson," he said, referring to Theodore's former housekeeper who still lived in town. Mrs. Peterson had been with the Davidson family for 40 years before Theodore's death. She'd retired shortly after, but she and Lucas had maintained a sweet friendship. She'd send him birthday cards and he'd visit her occasionally to help with yard work. Why Mrs. Peterson? Lucas hesitated, then pulled an old brass key from his pocket. Grandpa Theodore gave me this before he died. He told me it opened something important and that I'd know when to use it. I stared at the key, remembering now how Theodore had called Lucas over just days before his death. How they'd had a private conversation I hadn't thought much about at the time. Lucas, what are you planning? He looked at me with determination I'd never seen before. I'm planning to go to the reunion, Mom. I think Grandpa Theodore wanted me to. Before I could respond, he was out the door, leaving me staring after him with a mixture of pride and panic. He was gone for 3 hours. When he returned, he was carrying a manila envelope, thick with documents, and his face was flushed with excitement and something else, vindication. Mom, you need to see this. He spread the contents of the envelope across our dining room table. Legal documents, handwritten letters, what appeared to be a revised will. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As I read, my hands began to shake. Theodore Davidson hadn't just been fond of Lucas. He'd been horrified by his family's treatment of us. The documents detailed his observations over the years, his disappointment in his relatives' behavior, and his decision to take action. The revised will, properly notarized and witnessed, contained some expected provisions: charitable donations, family heirlooms distributed among relatives. But the bulk of the estate, including the Martha's Vineyard, property where the reunions were held, was left to James. And there was a specific clause about the reunions themselves. The annual Davidson family reunions shall remain a tradition, Theodore had written, with the understanding that family is defined not by blood alone, but by love, respect, and commitment to one another. Any family member who attempts to exclude others based on their origin or circumstances shall forfeit their invitation to future gatherings. But the most powerful part was a personal letter addressed to Lucas, explaining Theodore's wishes and his hope that Lucas would one day ensure the family lived up to its better nature. Mrs. Peterson had told Lucas the truth. Theodore had asked her to keep these documents safe, to give them to Lucas when he was old enough to understand their importance and when the family needed to be reminded of what really mattered. He knew this would happen, Lucas said, his voice filled with wonder. He knew they'd try to exclude me, and he made sure I'd have a way to fight back. I looked at my son, this brave, thoughtful boy who'd just uncovered a secret that would change everything, and felt something shift inside me. Theodore had given Lucas more than legal documents. He'd given him the power to demand respect, to claim his place in the family not through begging or proving himself, but through the explicit wishes of the family patriarch. "What do you want to do with this?" I asked. Lucas looked at the papers, then at me, his jaw set with quiet determination. "I want to go to the reunion. I want to show them what Grandpa Theodore really thought about family. And I want them to know that I don't need their permission to belong. I already do." As I watched my 14-year-old son carefully gather the documents that would change the course of our lives, I realized something profound was about to happen. Theodore Davidson had reached beyond the grave to ensure his vision of family, the inclusive, loving vision he'd shared with Lucas over chess games and story time, would triumph over the narrow-minded exclusion that had taken root after his death. The next morning, we would drive to Martha's Vineyard. Lucas would walk into that reunion carrying proof that the family patriarch had not only welcomed him, but had entrusted him with the future of the Davidson legacy. And Patricia Davidson, with all her carefully maintained control and subtle cruelties, was about to learn that sometimes the people you try hardest to keep out are exactly the ones who belong there most. The drive to Martha's Vineyard felt different. This time, usually, the anticipation mixed with dread would build as we approached the ferry. This time, Lucas sat in the passenger seat with Theodore's envelope in his lap, calm in a way I'd never seen before. He wasn't nervous or trying to prepare himself to be smaller, quieter, more acceptable. He was simply ready. We caught the last ferry Saturday evening. James had been sending worried texts all day, wondering where we were. I'd kept my responses vague. Lucas and I had some errands to run. See you tomorrow. By now, the reunion would be in full swing. The adults would be on the veranda sharing cocktails and old stories, while the younger cousins played lawn games before dinner. Lucas had suggested arriving Sunday morning during the traditional family brunch. Everyone will be there, he'd said, including the ones who decided I shouldn't be. We stayed the night at a small bed and breakfast in Oak Bluffs. I barely slept, but Lucas seemed peaceful, reading through Theodore's letter one more time before bed. In the morning, he dressed carefully, not in the formal clothes he used to wear to impress them, but in simple jeans and the blue sweater Theodore had given him for Christmas 3 years ago. The Davidson estate sprawled across 10 acres of pristine waterfront. White columns framed the main house, while smaller cottages dotted the property like chess pieces on a board. Cars filled the circular driveway, Range Rovers, Bentleys, the kind of vehicles that whispered wealth without needing to shout. We parked at the edge of the drive. Through the tall windows, I could see figures moving around the dining room, the Sunday brunch in progress. Lucas took a deep breath and picked up the envelope. "Ready?" I asked. "I've been ready for years," he said. We walked up the stone path together. Lucas didn't ask me to stay back or go in first. We were doing this as a team. The front door was unlocked, as it always was during gatherings. We could hear the familiar sounds of clinking china, laughter, multiple conversations overlapping. Lucas pushed open the door to the dining room, and the change was immediate. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips. James, who had been speaking to his cousin Michael, turned toward the doorway, and his mouth fell, open. Patricia, seated at the head of the long mahogany table like the queen she fancied herself, went very still. Her eyes moved from me to Lucas, then to the envelope in his hands, and something like recognition flickered across her face. "Elena," James said, standing quickly. "Lucas, I didn't know you were coming." "We changed our minds," Lucas said clearly, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. Patricia found her voice first, though it sounded strained. "Lucas, dear, I thought we discussed this. The house is quite full and—" "Aunt Patricia," Lucas interrupted, still polite, but no, longer deferential. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about whether I belong here." He moved into the room and I followed. 22 pairs of eyes tracked our movement. I recognized them all. James's cousins, their spouses, their children. People I'd shared holidays with, made small talk with at weddings, pretended everything was fine with for years. Lucas stopped in front of Patricia and placed the envelope on the table beside her untouched fruit plate. "Grandpa Theodore wanted me to have this. I think you should see what's inside." Patricia's face had gone pale, but she maintained her composure. "Lucas, this isn't the time or place for—" "Actually," Lucas said, his voice steady and sure, "I think this is exactly the time and place." He opened the envelope and withdrew the documents. The room was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Lucas unfolded Theodore's letter first, the one written in the old man's careful handwriting. "This is a letter Grandpa Theodore wrote to me before he died," Lucas announced to the room. "He asked Mrs. Peterson to keep it safe until I was old enough to understand it." Patricia reached for the letter, but Lucas held it back gently. "I'd like to read it aloud, if that's okay." Without waiting for permission, he began. "My dear Lucas, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And it probably means my family has forgotten what it means to be a Davidson. I've watched you these past years, and I've seen the kind of young man you're becoming. You have more Davidson spirit in your little finger than some people in this family have in their entire bodies. Several people around the table shifted, uncomfortably. James's cousin Sarah was staring at her plate. Michael cleared his throat. Lucas continued reading. The Davidson family has always been strongest when we welcomed people in, not when we kept them out. My grandfather understood this when he married my grandmother, even though her family came from nothing. My father understood this when he hired people based on their character, not their connections. Patricia tried to interrupt. Lucas, I really don't think... But Lucas kept reading, his voice growing stronger. I've seen how some members of our family treat you and your mother. It breaks my heart and would have broken your grandfather's heart too. This is not what we stand for. This is not who we are meant to be. The letter went on, explaining Theodore's disappointment, his hopes for the family's future, and his decision to take concrete action to ensure his values outlived him. When Lucas finished, he carefully folded the letter and pulled out the legal documents. This is Grandpa Theodore's revised will, he said, the one that was filed with his attorney but apparently never shared with the family. Patricia's composed mask finally cracked. That's impossible. I have a copy of Father's will. He left the estate to the family trust, managed by Dad, Lucas said, looking at James. The entire estate, including this house, including the reunion properties. James looked stunned. I don't understand. Mother and Patricia said the estate was being managed by the family board, that decisions about the property needed to be unanimous. Lucas pulled out another document. Grandpa Theodore was very specific. He was also very clear about his wishes for how the reunions should be run. He read the relevant clause about family being defined by love and respect, about excluding people based on origin forfeiting future invitations. The room was so quiet now that I could hear boats in the harbor. But Lucas wasn't finished. He pulled out one final document, a codicil to the will that Theodore had added just weeks before his death. This is the part I think you all really need to hear, Lucas said, his eyes finding Patricia's. Grandpa Theodore specifically names me as the guardian of family traditions. He says, and I quote, Lucas Davidson embodies the true spirit of our family, generous, inclusive, and kind. I entrust him with ensuring that the Davidson reunions remain a celebration of what brings us together, not what keeps us apart. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Then Patricia spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. He couldn't have meant for a child to... I'm not a child anymore, Lucas said firmly. And I'm not asking for permission to be here. I'm telling you that I belong here. Not because Dad adopted me, not because Mom married into this family, but because the man you all claim to honor explicitly said I belong here. James finally found his voice. Lucas, why didn't you show me this sooner? Because you needed to see how your family would treat us without Grandpa Theodore's protection, I said, speaking for the first time since entering the room. You needed to understand what we've been dealing with all these years. Patricia was staring at the documents like they might burst into flames. Even if this is all true, it doesn't change the fact that this family has traditions, ways of doing things. It changes everything, James said, his voice growing stronger. He stood and walked over to us, placing a hand on Lucas's shoulder. It means my father saw what I should have seen all along, that Lucas isn't just part of this family. He represents the best of what this family can be. Around the table, people began to murmur. Sarah spoke up. I remember Dad talking about updating his will, but Mother said it was just minor adjustments, charitable donations. Your mother, James said, his gaze fixed on Patricia, apparently decided to interpret Father's wishes rather selectively. Patricia's face had gone from pale to red. was protecting this family's legacy. These reunions have been happening for 60 years. You can't just exclude people because you don't think they belong, Lucas interrupted. That's not protection. That's just prejudice with better table manners. The words hung in the air like a challenge. I watched faces around the table, seeing recognition dawn in some, resistance in others. Michael was nodding slightly. Sarah's husband looked ashamed. The younger cousins seemed confused by the adults' discomfort. Then something unexpected happened. James's cousin David, who had always been quiet during these gatherings, started to laugh. Not mockingly, but with what sounded like relief. "You know what?" David said, standing up. "The kid's right. We've been pretending this is about tradition and family values, but really it's been about maintaining some ridiculous notion of purity. And honestly, it's exhausting." He turned to Lucas. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I never spoke up when I should have. I'm sorry I let you and your mother feel unwelcome in your own family." Lucas nodded, accepting the apology with more grace than most adults could manage. "Thank you, Uncle David. That means a lot." The title, Uncle David, seemed to surprise even David himself. But he smiled, and for the first time since I'd married into this family, it looked genuine. Patricia made one last attempt to maintain control. Even if Theodore wrote these things, even if they're legally binding, this family has a board of trustees who make decisions. "Actually," James said, pulling out his phone, "I think I need to make a call to the family lawyer. It seems there are some discrepancies between what we were told about Father's will and what he actually wrote." "The board you're referring to," Lucas added, consulting one of Theodore's documents, "was specifically dissolved in this codicil. All decisions about family properties and reunions now rest with Dad, with myself as advisor for matters relating to family inclusion and traditions." Patricia sank back into her chair, the fight going out of her. She looked older suddenly, smaller. The careful architecture of control she'd built over the years was crumbling, and everyone could see it. "I should have known," she said quietly. "He always liked you best." "He didn't like me best," Lucas said, surprising everyone with his gentleness. "He just saw me clearly, the way he saw all of us. He wanted this family to be better than its worst impulses." Over the next hour, the dynamic in the room shifted completely. Some family members, like David and Sarah, apologized directly and sincerely. Others sat quietly, processing what had been revealed. A few left early, unable to reconcile their behavior with Theodore's explicit condemnation of it. James spent most of the time on the phone with lawyers and accountants, unraveling years of misrepresentation about his father's estate. Patricia sat in silence, occasionally glancing at Lucas with an expression I couldn't quite read. As people began to leave, preparing for the usual Sunday afternoon activities, Lucas approached his great-aunt. She looked up at him warily. "I don't want to embarrass you, Aunt Patricia," he said quietly. "And I don't want to punish anyone. I just want to be part of this family without having to prove I deserve it." Patricia studied his face for a long moment. "You're very much like him, you know, your grandfather. He had the same way of making his point without crushing people completely." "He loved you too," Lucas said. "His letters mention how proud he was of the way you organized these reunions, how you kept the family connected. He just wanted you to connect more people, not fewer." For the first time, Patricia's composed facade completely cracked. Her eyes filled with tears. "I thought I was protecting what he built. I thought if we weren't careful about who we included, we'd lose what made us special." "What makes us special isn't who we exclude," Lucas said. "It's how we treat. The people we choose to love." This sentiment seemed to break through the last of Patricia's resistance. She reached out and took Lucas's hand. the first genuine gesture of acceptance she'd ever made toward him. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I owe your mother an apology. I let fear guide me instead of love, and that's not what this family is supposed to be about." As we finally left the estate that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because we'd won some battle or proven a point, but because Lucas had done something extraordinary. He'd used his grandfather's gift not as a weapon, but as a bridge. The drive home was different too. Lucas was quiet, but it was the contentment of someone who had finally been seen and acknowledged, not the resignation of someone who had given up trying. "Are you proud of me, Mom?" he asked as we boarded the ferry back to the mainland. "I've always been proud of you," I said. "But today? Today I'm in awe of you." He smiled, the first completely uninhibited smile I'd seen from him in years. Grandpa Theodore was right about family. It's not about who shares your blood, it's about who shares your values. As Martha's Vineyard grew smaller behind us, I realized that everything had changed, not just for our family, but for all the Davidsons. Theodore's final gift hadn't just secured Lucas's place at the table, it had reminded everyone what that table was supposed to represent. Sometimes the truth waits for exactly the right moment to reveal itself. Sometimes it takes a 14-year-old boy with his grandfather's letter to remind grown adults what family really means. And sometimes, the people who fight hardest to keep others out are the ones who most need to be reminded that love expands when you let it, rather than shrinking when you try to hoard it. Lucas dozed against my shoulder as the ferry carried us home, still holding Theodore's letter in his hands. Looking at him, I realized that my son hadn't just gained acceptance that day. He'd helped an entire family remember how to be worthy of the name they carried. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.